So Doug tells me I'm the outsider, and so I'm happy to be here. I come bearing gifts. We've got some Mount Shasta Avalanche stickers to appease you all. Outsider.
So we'll already go ahead and applaud for Nick.
Yeah. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Doug asked me, invited me out, and I was like, yeah, excited. And then he asked me to present, and I was like, whoa. Yeah, okay, sure. So the story I picked, we're going to switch gears a little bit. It has to do with a rescue. Most of my experience has been as a climbing ranger on Mount Shasta, seasonal ranger for 9 years, and then just the last 3 years as a full-time working with the Avalanche Center. So my on-the-job snow experience is somewhat limited. I'm learning a lot, and I'm glad to be here. But a lot of my experience has been on the snow, but in the summertime, not a ton of avalanches, but a lot of rescues, dealing with climbers, and that sort of thing. We get a bunch of climbers on Shasta. Recent years, we get typically about 4,000 to 5,000 climbers per season. That's summit passes sold, so that's not people who are poaching it or whatever. But the number's gone down in the past, about 8 or 9 years ago, we would get 7,000 to 9,000. So anyway, we get a lot of climbers, and then later in the season, we get a lot of campers and day hikers and that sort of thing on Shasta. I changed the title of my talk, and I had originally said Rescue, Safety, and Responsibility. I was like, man, I don't know if I'm prepared to represent rescue, safety, and responsibility. That's kind of a big topic. So I downgraded, and I went with a story with lessons. So we'll start. Just a quick background on basically how search and rescue works on Mount Shasta. And I'm not sure if it's the same elsewhere. I think it kind of is. But Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department assumes the lead role in any search and rescue activity. We have an MOU between the Sheriff's Department and the Forest Service that basically says Sheriff's Department must provide timely notification of all searches, rescues, fatalities, or accidents on the National Forest land. Sheriff's Department should coordinate all search and rescue activity within the Mount Shasta Castle Crags Wilderness. So Castle Crags also falls under our jurisdiction, although we don't spend a lot of time down there, with the appropriate contacts. And so basically what happens, we get a call, or the Sheriff's Department gets a 911 call, and then they will call the myself or one of the other rangers on duty at the time, let us know what's going on, and then we sort of formulate a plan. A lot of times we'll already be up on the mountain already, and we may be able to carry out the rescue without even their help. By the time they get up to, say, 12 or 13,000 feet or wherever the rescue is, it could be hours. We're already there. We take care of it, and they don't even show up. Other rescues, multi-day rescues, and of course they get involved and we call out the posse. So that's the little background. So the story starts on a lovely day in June. Typical situation here at the Wilderness Trailhead. So this is the south side of Mount Shasta. This road, Everett Memorial Highway, is a dead-end road, but it is plowed to 7,000 feet all winter long. A little trailhead here. And we get all kinds of people up there, climbers, snowmobilers. There's a little section, the entire mountain of Shasta is a wilderness area except for one section where snowmobiles are allowed. So we get a lot of people. It gets crowded, and it's kind of hard to believe this is a wilderness trailhead. This wasn't from the day of this particular incident, but a day in June, not uncommon for it to look like this. Cars can be parked down the road a long ways. So Bunny Flat sits right around the corner here. Mount Shasta's up there, and the cars parked down the road. It gets very crowded. It can get kind of crazy. So June 11th, 2011, there was 3 rangers on duty on the south side of the mountain. So we have a tent here. We keep, have anybody been to Shasta up on the mountain? Several? Yeah, I believe. Nice. we keep a tent on the south side of the mountain, more or less May through October-ish, September, October. One on the north side, one on the south side. This is the south side, this is Avalanche Gulch. And we staff this tent on the weekends, and we're talking to climbers. We'll climb one day usually, educating where to go pee, use your pack-out bags, what to do, what not to do, route conditions, weather, that sort of thing. So there were some rangers up, staying up there on the weekend, and they had climbed that morning. Early that morning, climbers will leave 3, 4, 5 a.m. It was clear. So the whole gamut of people at Lake Helen, sometimes we'll get 50, 75, even 100. The record for Lake Helen is 175 folks on a Saturday night at Lake Helen. This day, there's probably 50 or 60, plus folks from down lower on the mountain, camping elsewhere, one-day climbers and such. A lot of people on the upper mountain. Fast-moving storms shrouded the mountain and created cold, windy, whiteout conditions that morning. Many climbers were still on the upper mountain. The upper mountain we consider greater than 12,000 feet. So this is Red Banks up here. This is not the summit. Red Banks is about 12,500. So once you get up on the upper mountain, I'll show you a slide here in a bit. It gets very easy to wander off the wrong side of the mountain in limited visibility conditions. So 9:30, 911 call comes in, the lost climber, male in his 20s, who had also, not only was he lost, he had taken a fall while trying to descend. Reports were of a lower leg injury. The climber called in with a cell phone. Reception was poor, and his phone died. I spoke with him on the phone. He had no clue where he was. It was whited out. He was trying to give me landmarks and such, and first time on the mountain, a rock that's red doesn't help us too much. And so we didn't really, so reception was poor. I pretty much gained no information from him. His phone died, and so we were like, okay, what are we going to do now? So the sheriff's department, we requested that the sheriff's department ping his cell phone and find out where he was at. When they ping the cell phone, it gives an approximate location of where he could potentially be, because otherwise it was a whiteout. I mean, it's a needle in a haystack. We could be wandering around for days looking for this guy. So we kind of wanted to at least have a general idea of where he was before we sent people into the area to start looking. We had 2 rangers, so we'll move on here. So this is just a slide of the mountain. Of course, there's not much snow on it, but just to kind of show you, here's Red Banks. Once you get up above this kind of 12,500 elevation, it's pretty easy to wander off the wrong side of the mountain. A lot of times clouds will come in, they'll shroud this upper portion of the mountain, it'll be clear down lower, and so people wander off the wrong side of the mountain. What we do now, this is a big problem 5-10 years ago, and so what we'll do is stick little red wands in the snow, mark the path down back into Avalanche Gulch. Avalanche Gulch is the most popular route. Just to at least get folks, we'll wand it down to at least Red Banks, to at least get them in Avalanche Gulch. Once you're in the gulch, they're corralled by the 2 ridge lines. You can basically head downhill. The other sides of the mountain, the east side of the mountain is glaciated, north side is glaciated, and it's not a good place to be as a novice. So, we wanted to get a ping off his cell phone. They pinged his cell phone. It put him somewhere in this area, and that's about how accurate it is. It's not super accurate. That's Thumb Rock, and you can keep that in mind. You'll see this feature in a couple other slides. Thumb Rock sticks up like a big thumb. Red Banks is right here, and then this is the Conwauketon Glacier. It's a fairly small glacier, but it's got an ice fall down here. And then this area right in here, it's not the glacier, but it's steep. There's a lot of little chutes, gullies, a lot of loose rock, and it's 45 plus degrees, steeper in some areas. So we pinged his cell phone. We're like, okay, he's in this area. So we had 2 rangers that were in this area up here in Misery Hill, just above Red Banks. They had climbed that morning. Storm moved in. They were just trying to kind of get folks off the mountain, usher them down into the Avalanche Gulch. notified them of the situation, and rangers then began their search at 10:30. We let them know of the climber's location, so they started to work their way down the ridge and towards Thumb Rock. There's Thumb Rock again. Lake Helen is right here, sits at 10,400 feet. And then I was kind of in lower Avalanche Gulch. I, at that point, had decided to descend down to Pony Flat, the trailhead. Search and rescue was on their way up. Helicopters were on their way up. You know, it would have been fairly pointless for me to climb all the way up into a whiteout and try to find this guy when we already had 2 rangers up there. So I felt it'd be better for me to move down lower, help with search base operations. Bunny Flat's crowded. Get a helicopter in there, sort of manage an LZ in there. So I descended. So the rangers start to come down the ridge and do their search. This is just kind of another shot reiterating what I've just mentioned. That was at about 10:30. Thumb Rock again, approximate location of the climber. You can see now how it's really easy. So here's the summit. We call this the Summit Plateau, Misery Hill. You come wandering down here, and if you just bust a little bit too far left, you're on this whole east side here, and it's messy. If there's any questions understanding the story or anything, please holler. Okay, so again, these pictures are not, they're just pictures I had on file that were good and kind of show the terrain. It's not representative of the conditions at the time, but okay, so at 1100, the 2 rangers made their way down the ridge, across Red Banks, onto the other side of the Thumb. Again, it's whited out, completely whited out, pretty cold, it's windy. They made voice contact with this climber. And the initial descent made by the climber, this is, you know, in hindsight, he had descended down, they couldn't see tracks, it was, you know, snow was firm. He had descended down kind of the skier's right side of Kunwakaton Glacier, and he was right in this location. He probably fell somewhere in there. So he was here, rangers were here. They didn't know he was there, but they established voice contact. Excuse me. So this is where it kind of gets interesting. 1100, they're yelling at this guy. They couldn't really communicate other than, hey, yeah, hey, okay, right on, yeah. So then they had voice contact. One ranger felt okay with descending to the climber. The other ranger did not. An argument began. These guys, friends of mine, one of them was my brother-in-law. They've worked together a long time. They've both been rangers for, 6 and 7 years now. They started arguing, and the argument basically was, well, you're an effing pussy. Oh, you're an effing asshole. You're a pussy. You're an effing. So it was going nowhere, and it finally ended. The confident climber said, well, if this guy dies, it's on your shoulders. And that was it. So the confident ranger obviously felt confident in going down to this guy. The other ranger did not feel comfortable going down into a whiteout, cold conditions, windy, steep side, or the steep aspect of the east side. They argued for a while. I was talking to them on the radio. They said, we didn't feel comfortable. They tried some other routes to try to access the guy. And eventually, at about 1300, they made the decision to retreat back to Lake Helen. So I had told them to go back to Lake Helen. They were going to come out that day, but they ended up having to have a Cliff Bar dinner. Yeah.
What was the big picture weather forecast? Was that storm that was on the mountain, was that forecast to get out of there quick, or was it going to sock in for a couple of days? Or?
It was expected. It wasn't expected to be a big storm. It actually kind of was about like this. As the day progressed, we started to see a little bit of clearing, except we still had kind of that cap cloud on Shasta. We get those a lot, where you get those lenticular-looking clouds. But as the day progressed, we saw the cloud deck raise a little bit, and the weather started to clear. And then the next day it was actually clear, and we'll get to that. So those guys are arguing. They decide, no, we can't get to this guy. They abandon him. They go back to Lake Helen. They didn't have any food. They ate Cliff Bars that night. I wanted them to stay there for the night and then potentially resume search attempts in the morning. I'm getting ahead of myself. So 15:30, myself plus one ranger and two SAR members, we snowmobiled up into the old ski bowl outside the wilderness. You can take sleds up in there. We got up to, well, this is actually the old ski bowl here. So here's a ridge line. We got up somewhere down here. We climbed up and over Sergeant's Ridge, traversed over into the east side. Yelling for this guy. At that point, we had a little bit of visibility, kind of in and out of the clouds. We couldn't contact him. No tracks. Couldn't find him. So we had to. Darkness ensued, and we had to bail back to the search base. So we gave her a pretty good attempt to find that guy that day, because we knew that night, of course, this guy was by himself, didn't have any extra gear, unfamiliar with the terrain, had taken a fall, potentially lower leg injury. So we had, this was potentially a serious situation. So darkness fell, and everyone came back. We had the two rangers at camp at Lake Helen, and we went home for the night. So the next morning, the two rangers came back up. This is Thumb Rock. Kanwakaton Glacier sits right down here. They had made voice contact right in this area. They climbed back up to here and basically tried to retrace their steps. It was a clear day, probably looked like this actually, and they were able to ski down this shot right here. It's kind of a narrow little steep section, but they were able to ski down. Myself plus a couple others were flown up onto Sergeant's Ridge, and then so again, voice contact, initial descent of the climber. The next day, rangers came up, were able to ski down this. Myself plus a couple others were able to traverse in. We were looking for tracks all along here, and finally, the two rangers up here sort of found some tracks. The snow was pretty firm. As you got down lower, the tracks were much more discernible. And so we located his tracks right about here. And at that point, we were able to follow his tracks all the way down. This is called Mud Creek Canyon. And it's a big old canyon. It pretty much drains this entire glacier and this whole east side of the mountain. And let's see. So we followed his tracks down Mud Creek Canyon. Again, this is just another view of the east side. Descent around a climber. And there's Mud Creek Canyon, so it's kind of dark. But anyways, this is Mud Creek Canyon, and he came all the way down here. All the way down to, it's probably like 5,500 for 6,000 feet. Where he eventually was, we picked him up and they airlifted him out that afternoon. So, happy ending. The guy lived. His leg injury was not as bad as we thought. He had a puncture wound from his crampon, but he didn't break it or he had sprained it or something. But he was able to walk, and he walked all the way down here. This guy was like an ex-football player, so he was tough, which probably helped. And that's the story. So when I first started working up on Shasta, it's quite likely that maybe my interpretation of this whole situation was, glad that worked out. This is myself, and this is Forrest. He works up there still. But obviously there's some lessons to be learned with this incident. And so I think it's important to argue both sides, or at least to look at both sides. And so, all this, well, I'll save that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I feel. On the left side here, you can argue great decision. Rescuer safety is paramount. We're always told that. Rescuer safety is number one. Rescuer safety is number one, over and over. So, good decision, boys. East side of Shasta composed of very loose rock. So a lot of rock fall. The terrain was steep. We got a lot of chutes and funnels, potential target for, rangers being target for rock fall. Glacier with ice fall at the bottom, limited visibility, and again, rescuer safety. The other side is the climbing rangers should be the A-team. We have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of experience, and we conduct a lot of training up on Shasta, and we should be able to put that into play at certain times, I think. And especially in this situation where we had, I didn't put it up there, but we had voice contact with this guy, and they chose to bail. It's kind of my opinion that we should have probably gone and snagged that guy and brought him back into Avalanche Gulch and down to Lake Helen and what have you. We had those two guys, the two rangers, had the equipment necessary. Anytime we climb from Lake Helen up to the summit, we carry pickets, a rope, stove, pot, all the survival equipment they tell you to bring. We had that. And for some reason, one ranger felt unsafe. So, there's this, well, never mind. Climber within earshot, no bivy gear, cold temps, solo. So lessons learned. These are kind of direct lessons learned. So there's kind of broken it down into two sections. Lesson learned directly from this incident that applied directly to this case, and then also some indirect lessons learned. Kind of what Drew had mentioned, sort of the sharp end and then the blunt end lessons. So we all agree that without verbal contact with the climber, the ranger's decision would have been appropriate. I don't expect these guys to be dangling off a cliff and rappelling into the mist looking for a climber that they don't know he's there, but they could hear him, so he wasn't that far away. We didn't, hindsight's 20/20, but we thought this guy was injured. He was by himself. You guys get it. Another lesson learned, don't argue. Those guys argue. That's going to get you nowhere. Now we encourage innovation and working together, and that'll be covered in the next slide. So work together, talk it out, and communicate. That's been a common theme in a lot of the presentations I've seen today is communication, and it sounds easy, but it's not all the time. Especially communicating clearly, I think, is harder. I find, especially as a leader of a group of people that operate in a potentially hazardous environment, clear communication is not always that easy. You think you're communicating clearly, but maybe you're not. And then lastly, consider all your options. So, we don't have to shred into every rescue on our skis like rescue rangers. We have these tools. Consider all the options before you make the decision to abandon ship. So these are kind of the blunt end lessons, some more indirect lessons that I've thought about a lot of these things. I haven't necessarily voiced them, so maybe it'll promote some conversation or get some people thinking, or maybe you guys apply some of these things to your work and have a story to tell. But there's some things I thought about. The whole rescue sort of bothered me because there was all those direct things we learned some stuff about, but I was just like, man, there's got to be something else. Why those guys decided they couldn't do it, carry out the rescue. And so these are just some things that I've put together, researched a little bit, and pulled from various resources. And I've heard this a little bit today. Leadership is the ability to motivate, influence, and empower. Oops, it cut it off. So this just says leadership is the ability to motivate, influence, empower. We are a team of leaders, and everybody is responsible for being a leader. And so a leader not only can come from a position title, but it should come from everybody in the hierarchy. And you kind of mentioned that everybody's responsible for risk management, and we can all be leaders. In this situation, the confident ranger should have been, all right, look, man, let's chill out, let's put our jackets on, let's get a bite to eat, we can do this, instead of, you're a pussy. Task cohesion. degree of which team members can work together to achieve a goal. Team cohesion, the tendency for a team to remain united in pursuit of a common goal. Pretty important stuff, I think. We can be good at task cohesion, but we may be horrible at team cohesion. And so that's stuff that I'm definitely trying to work on with my team. Are those two things. Values and attitudes definitely directly influence decisions, making sure my guys' values and attitudes are on par with what I'm thinking so that the decisions we make are good. And then I like this one, the asset or liability. The Shasta Trinity National Forest just put on a leadership training. This guest speaker came and he says, the bottom line in any situation that you should ask yourself, asset or liability? And I was like, okay. And I started thinking about it, and it makes a lot of sense. So, asset or liability. Is that thought I just had an asset or liability to the situation? Is what I just said an asset or liability to the situation? Is this decision I'm going to make an asset or liability to the situation? And I think it's really good. Again, I've thought about this. I haven't talked about it a lot, but I liked it, and so I put it up here, and I want to mention it to you guys. Role clarity, role acceptance, pretty important. I think there was maybe some role acceptance issues, maybe, that day up there in the fog. Encouraging innovation, exhaust all possibilities. Again, we had the knowledge, experience, and tools, and those guys weren't very innovative that day. They just said, whoop, we're done. Well, one of them said that. And, of course, the other guy wasn't going to go down by himself. Adjusting self-talk. This is something I'm not a pro on, but, we all have self-talk. We talk to ourselves all the time, and adjusting that in a positive way. So, like this presentation today, I don't know how much I self-talked to myself, saying, God, you're going to blow it. Don't be nervous. Everyone's pros, and like, it's cool. You project yourself and you put yourself into a situation before you're even there, and sometimes that can create negative outcome. And then again, lastly, but not least, clarity and communication. Talked about that. It kind of speaks for itself. Lessons learned indirect, and lastly here, you guys, I appreciate everyone listening, and I like quotes. I've seen a few quotes today. This is sort of a leadership-based quote, and it says, a leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. That's all I got. Thanks.